Tonight, America calls for a temporary ceasefire. A future king demands permanent peace. Israel is now increasingly isolated over its deadline for attacking Rafah. Has there been a subtle shift in this war? And will it change anything for more than 1 million people in Gaza? Today, Gazans accuse the US of double standards and ask how they can push for peace while still arming Israel.
We do not trust the words of the Americans. We want actions, not words.
When Russia attacked Ukraine, the world got up to act. The world sanctioned them.
Israel says it wants to see an end to the fighting after an unprecedented intervention from the Prince of Wales. This evening, I'll speak to a doctor who fled Gaza's biggest hospital and hear his message to the United Nations. And coming up, Vladimir Putin will be sanctioned again. But is there any point? That's after the death of Alexei Navalny and the suspicious murder of a Russian defector. And the luxury car, which symbolizes a new special relationship. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. Is this the moment the tide turned against Israel? Has Rafah become a red line for the West? The United States, Israel's staunchest ally, would like you to think that. That's after its diplomats called for a temporary ceasefire overnight. Is that really a shift? Well, we know that diplomacy can be complicated. Hours later, America blocked a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire at the United Nations Security Council. So what's the difference? Why not just follow words with actions? That's what people in Gaza were asking today as they struggled to feed their families. And as that deadline set by Israel for a ground offensive in the south draws closer. There was another unexpected development today, though. An intervention from the man who's next in line to be king. Prince William called for an end to the war and said too many people had been killed. A doctor who I spoke to inside Gaza agreed. Mahmoud says he's seen too many children die on the operating table. He's calling for an urgent, decisive action. We'll hear those voices from the United Nations and Rafah in a moment. But let's get started with that change in tone from world leaders since October the 7th.
I stand with Israel. The United Kingdom stands with Israel against this terrorism.
Absolutely clear about responsibility and absolutely clear in calling this out. We stand with Israel.
We must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel and respond to this attack.
What is happening in the Gaza Strip is not a war, it's a genocide. It's a war between a highly prepared army against women and children.
Self-defense is no answer to genocide. Nothing can ever justify genocide.
The conduct of the response has been over the top.
We cannot afford an Israeli attack on Rafah. It is certain to produce another humanitarian catastrophe. We need a lasting ceasefire now.
Israel obviously has a right to defend itself against what was an appalling terrorist attack perpetrated by Hamas. But it must do that in accordance with humanitarian law.
Now, hundreds of thousands of protesters are expected to take part in protests in central London today to demand an immediate ceasefire in Israel's campaign against Hamas in Gaza.
We want Israel to stop and think very seriously before it takes any further action.
Palestine! Free, free! Palestine!
An end to the fighting, not just now, not just for a pause, but permanently.
The changing tone from the West, and despite those concerns from the US president, today America vetoed another attempt at the United Nations to call for a ceasefire. Here's our US correspondent, Mark Stone.
They are images which tell their own story. The coastal road in Gaza City, an area destroyed weeks ago in Israel's offensive. The crowds were here for food, flour from an aid truck. The gunfire, say locals, was the Israeli military. We can't be sure. Gazan officials have been using live rounds to disperse crowds. Either way, it's panic and chaos. We call on the entire world to see Gaza's people, he says. I call on the Muslim world, the Arab world, the UN to bring food to the people. In the United Nations, a body which has shown its limitations so much with this war, another vote for a ceasefire.
Those against?
And another American veto. But this time, an apparent shift in America's position.
While we cannot support a resolution that would put sensitive negotiations in jeopardy, we look forward to engaging on a text that we believe will address so many of the concerns we all share, so that we can have a temporary ceasefire.
The use of the word ceasefire by an American as part of a resolution they plan to table soon. A shift? Well, at the State Department, it was all about semantics.
From a policy perspective, we want to achieve a temporary stop in fighting. You can call that a ceasefire, you can call that a pause. Ultimately, we want to see the fighting stop so hostages can get out, hostages can be released, and humanitarian assistance can get in.
And so if there is a shift in America's position, it is subtle to say the least. The debate the UN Security Council is having is the same one they've been having for months, the nuance between a pause and a ceasefire. And on Israel's proposed invasion of Rafah, the Americans are not saying don't do it. They're just saying don't do it without a plan for civilians. There's a difference there. Whether Israel does have a plan for civilians and whether it's viable is not yet clear. But Prime Minister Netanyahu's messaging is typically straight.
We are committed to continuing the war until we achieve all of its goals, which means the elimination of Hamas, the release of all the hostages, and the promise that Gaza will no longer pose a threat to Israel. There is no pressure that can change that.
Near Rafah, at the place where people were supposed to evacuate, the displaced have little hope.
Unfortunately, when it comes to America and the Europeans, I don't know. They seem scared. They know the truth. They know that we, as a Palestinian people, deserve life, deserve a state, deserve to have a decision, deserve to have an honourable life just like any other state in the world.
100,000 Gazans are now either dead, injured or missing. Those are United Nations numbers, a UN unable to find agreement or peace. Mark Stone, Sky News in Washington.
Well, in the UK, there hasn't just been a noticeable change in Labour's stance to a ceasefire in Gaza. A rare intervention, too, from the future king. This next report comes from our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates.
The royal face of a growing public outcry.
Health system that is totally collapsed.
Prince William hearing first-hand accounts of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The future king making a rare and significant intervention into global politics.
How are you keeping spirits up in your organisation? How are you keeping people motivated to deliver the support and the humanitarian work you're doing in such conditions?
This visit to the British Red Cross followed a strongly worded statement from the Prince of Wales. He said he is deeply concerned about the terrible human cost of the conflict, that there is a desperate need for increased humanitarian support, and called for an end to the fighting as soon as possible. The Prince, not the only major public intervention in this crisis today. In Westminster, the Labour Party has faced weeks of internal strife about its position on the conflict. Now a new stance backing an immediate ceasefire.
We have set down a motion calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire.
I'm a bit confused. Are you saying that Israel can't use its armed forces now to try and secure the release of the hostages?
It's really important. A humanitarian ceasefire that's immediate requires both sides to lay down their arms.
I'm still confused. Are you saying that targeted action can be taken by Israel to release hostages, to free hostages, or not?
We are calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire which requires both sides to lay down their arms.
The Foreign Secretary commemorating the war dead in the Falklands. The government says no permanent ceasefire can happen until all Israeli hostages are released.
We think that what we need is a pause in the fighting and the hostages to come out and aid to go in. That should happen straight away. Then what we need to do is to turn that pause into a permanent, sustainable ceasefire. Now, lots of things will have to happen in order for that to be the case and for fighting not to resume.
For months, the two main parties have been in lockstep in their position towards Israel and Gaza. But as of today, no longer. After weeks of pain and contortion, the Labour Party's changed its stance, now telling Israel to stop fighting. A new position they adopted just a day before the SNP put the issue to a divisive vote. And it comes amid signs of a wider shift in the EU and the US and closer to home.
Too many have been killed, said Prince William today, who is planning more engagements to highlight the human suffering caused by this war on both sides in the weeks to come. Neither royal nor political interventions are that likely to change what happens in this conflict. Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Let's go to our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who joins us live from Washington. And Mark, if there is a shift, it certainly isn't being felt by the people of Gaza. Right now, it's still just words.
Yeah, and you know, I genuinely can't detect much of a shift. I mean, President Biden last week used the word ceasefire, and he caveated the proposed invasion of Rafah as they did at the UN today, or as his official did at the UN today, saying it can't happen unless you come up with a viable plan for the civilians. Incidentally, the Israelis have not yet come up with any such plan. There is a suggestion they have one that they're putting together, but it hasn't been released yet. And so we're back to what I remember standing here literally months ago talking about the difference between a pause and a ceasefire. That is where we are still. It's worth reflecting on why the Americans vetoed the ceasefire that was on the table in New York today. And the reason, in a sense, it's logical. Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the US ambassador to the UN, she explained it. She said, look, if you have a ceasefire right now, that removes any imperative by Hamas to release the hostages. You need to keep the pressure on to release the hostages. But against that, I suppose the question is, how many civilians need to die? I mean, that figure that I cited at the end of my report there, absorb it, because it is quite staggering. 100,000 Gazans, either dead, injured, or missing, presumed dead. Those are not Hamas figures. They are UN figures, a quite staggering number. And the arguments, whether they be here in Washington, up in New York, or in capitals across Europe, is over semantics, over ceasefire versus pause.
Yeah, I mean, talking about those numbers, even the UN, and if you speak to US officials, they will say we are also still being on the more conservative side of things.
Yeah, and you know, that's true. You know, I've spoken to many officials, UN officials, over the past few months who point out that when people criticize the Hamas figures and say, well, hang on a minute, you're talking about Hamas figures there, how can you trust them? Yes, there's no suggestion that anyone should trust Hamas, of course not. But when you look at previous conflicts, it's clear that the Hamas figures in those conflicts, whether it be 2021, 2014, go back as far as you like, the Hamas figures that are quoted then after the war, after the moment when the UN gets into Gaza and has a look, yes, you'll find that the numbers that Hamas released are pretty accurate and tally with the UN figures. So there is no suggestion that these figures for the extraordinary number of people to be affected in Gaza, they are accurate. And, you know, I think, Yalda, the one way to end all this, of course, would be to provide the Palestinian people, forget Hamas, provide the Palestinian people with what they want. They are arguing that they should have a state of their own, which is why we have seen language, and I do think this is a shift, like Yalda, we have seen language from the West talking about recognizing a Palestinian state at the beginning of the process rather than at the end of the process. That would be a game changer. That could provide some space for the release of hostages. But of course, why is that not happening? Well, because the Israeli government under Netanyahu has no interest in a two-state solution.
Mark, thanks so much for bringing us up to date and for all of your analysis there. Well, concerns are growing for those 1 million people sheltering in Rafah. Today, the World Health Organization said the main hospital serving southern Gaza is no longer able to function. You'll remember that the facility was raided by Israeli forces last week. Well, earlier I spoke to one of the surgeons forced out by the IDF. Here's Dr. Mahmoud Raja Abu Shamala.
The situation in Nasser Hospital from the beginning of the war is very horrible and very awful. We lack a lot of supplies like anesthesia. We do perform like minor surgeries without anesthesia. The screams of injured person was so awful when he was in minor surgery, and we don't have enough amount of anesthesia for him because we use this anesthesia for bad injuries, not for injuries like superficial or even deep injuries. So,
Dr. Mahmoud, you were obviously also performing a lot of your surgeries on injured children. Could you tell us a little bit about that? I've seen some of the footage you've sent us, and a lot of it is of children.
The injury of the children was so difficult because, like in the head, in the face, in all parts of his body, there was awful, very awful injury, and some of them is dead when we do a major surgery for him because there is a lot of injured people, so we can't manage or deal with that number of injured people, especially children.
Dr. Mahmoud, your teams were in contact with the Israelis from the beginning of the war. What were they telling you?
Israeli forces always tell us that will never enter the hospital. You are in a safe place. Please stay in the hospital. Don't leave the hospital. Always. The Israeli forces tell us that it's not a safe place at all. When they arrived to the hospital, they surrounded the hospital by tanks, by quadcopters, by bulldozers, even soldiers, the snipers all around the hospital. We can't even stand by a window because if you stand by the window, you will take a shot in your head, on your shoulder, in your chest. They forced all the patients to leave the hospital, but some of the patients, especially the patient on oxygen mask and oxygen machine, they cannot leave the hospital because if they leave the hospital, they will die. And some of them can't walk or stand. So Khan Younis and Gaza is fully destroyed. There is no any shape of life there. Stop killing. We are a human. We are not an animals. We are not an numbers. We have lives. We have loves. We have hearts. We have jobs. We have homes. We have a brothers and sisters and father. Please, I love them. We are a human. We are not an animal. Please stop this genocide.
That was Dr. Mahmoud Raja Abu Shamala speaking to us a little earlier there from Gaza. Well, let's bring in tonight's panel, political strategist Hilary Rosen and Yasmin Sirhan, a writer at Time magazine. Thank you both for joining us. Yasmin, I'll come to you first. You know, at the very beginning of this, since October the 7th, President Biden went to Israel, he gave them a bear hug. He said, I've always been with you. I've always supported Israel. I'll continue to support Israel. And that's what he's done. He's been Israel's staunchest ally. The United States is Israel's staunchest ally. But now they have an issue where the tide is starting to turn, where Western leaders are speaking up. And we heard from the French just a couple of months ago saying it's intolerable. The civilian deaths need to stop. So I guess the question is, does the US still have leverage over Israel? And is it being tough enough?
The U.S. has a lot of leverage over Israel, but up until this moment, we haven't seen the Biden administration want to use a lot of that leverage. And of course, you know, we're not just talking about military assistance and $3.8 billion a year to Israel, but we're also talking about defending Israel at forums like the United Nations, and also that close friendship and partnership that you talked about. And I think, for whatever reason, Biden took the decision, certainly at the beginning was expected to be very supportive, very upfront, but he didn't express any conditions for those support. A lot of observers saw it as kind of giving Israel a blank check. And of course, no one was in any doubt that there was going to be a kind of retaliation. And it's only really recently that we're starting to hear rumbles and reports that the president is not happy with how Israel's handling this war, that he's not happy with Netanyahu in particular. But unfortunately, we're not actually seeing a lot of action to match those words.
And I think that's the point, isn't it, Hilary? I mean, you're closely connected to the Democratic Party. You speak to them all of the time. There was a feeling that in private, President Biden said, look, I'm going to put pressure on him. And publicly, I have to show support.
Yeah.
not sure either of those strategies worked.
No, in fact, he said originally, I'm going to go and show support so that I can be tough privately. And that was the strategy. And I think that was, in retrospect, a bit of a miscalculation on his part. I think Netanyahu took that for granted. He still takes for granted the overall support of a majority of Americans for Israel that I don't think exists today the way it did even 6 months ago. And so now we see the Biden administration searching for ways to demonstrate that they will be tough on Israel. We're seeing that at the UN, where they are not approving a ceasefire resolution, but they're coming up with their own solution to encourage people to support. So I think the Biden White House is really struggling now with demonstrating that they are willing to be tough. They're uncomfortable what's happening there.
I mean, but what...
And they need to be more public about it. That's their struggle.
You know, I'm going to push you on that, Hillary, because, you know, when we talk about how much leverage Israel has, is it that America doesn't quite understand its own power?
I don't think so. I think that what you have is just, you know, this is history as much as anything else. The United States has been reflexively pro-Israel, both Democrats and Republicans, for many, many years. And I think that they've taken for granted in many ways that the American people are completely pro-Israel. I think this pushback in the U.S. that we're seeing all over the world, calling for a ceasefire, calling for, you know, criticism of President Biden in states that should be all for him, I think it's taken them by surprise because, you know, Americans, you know, of that generation remember the Holocaust. Americans of this current generation only know Bibi Netanyahu. Those are two very different experiences of Israelis and Jews.
Well, let's bring in our next guest, Frank Lowenstein, former U.S. Special Envoy for Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, who joins us live from Washington. Thank you so much, Frank, for joining us here on the programme. There's a lot of talk now about whether there is a shift in America's position. I mean, frankly, if there is a shift, it's very subtle.
But I don't think it's insignificant. The fact that we were willing to put forward a resolution that called for a ceasefire, that clearly condemned any attack on Rafah, that didn't involve a plan for removing all the civilians, which is simply not possible. That's a real change from the Biden administration, and I'm sure it was one that the Israelis were not happy about. So I guess the real question then becomes, are we willing to follow that up with stronger actions? Because obviously the Israelis have indicated again and again they'll do whatever they think is in their national security interest regardless.
Yeah, but President Biden hasn't said don't go into Rafah. He said just come up with a plan before you do so.
Yes, but I don't think that plan actually exists. I don't think there's any way you can get 1 million people out of Rafah. There's nowhere for them to go. There's no way to get them there. So by saying that we don't support an invasion of Rafah without that kind of a plan is effectively saying we don't support that plan. And in fact, we really are pushing as hard as we can for a ceasefire. And I think all the actions you're seeing at the UN, which will undoubtedly
we've actually seen Tony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, make at least 5 trips to the region, confront Benjamin Netanyahu, and frankly walk away with nothing every time.
That's true. And I think that's really leading to some increased frustration among President Biden and his senior team. And listen, I think this is a first step, right? It remains to be seen whether we're willing to back it up with further actions and really whether we're willing to signal to the Israelis that there will be much tougher actions coming at the UN and otherwise if they don't change course there. So there remains to be seen, but I wouldn't underestimate the significance of this step. It shows that we're willing to break with the Israelis publicly on something they care very much about.
I guess I would, sorry, Hillary, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it begs a different question, whether Netanyahu really cares that much about the U.S.'s position at this point. The same way that they're discounting other countries' positions, I'm not sure that Netanyahu doesn't believe that he can go it alone if he needs to for a while.
Can he go it alone, though? I mean, we're talking about a huge amount of support in military aid and you know, I guess just the fact that the United States is Israel's staunchest ally. The United States has so many things in its toolbox that it could use. It's just choosing not to.
Absolutely. I mean, there's already reports of the U.S. sending further ammunitions to Israel. So certainly there are things on the table. I think, look, the U.S. speaking out by virtue of its relationship and its support is going to matter more than perhaps when other of Israel's close allies speak out.
For sure.
However, you know, I think, again, saying, asking for a temporary ceasefire as soon as is practicable, even if insiders say, look, that is the Biden administration going much further, outside observers are going to look at that and say, well, actually, is that doing much?
Doesn't feel like it's enough, right?
No.
But I think you can't underestimate how much support there is inside of Israel for Netanyahu until the hostages come back. And I think that is the critical piece that the U.S. is putting in their resolution that differs from the other resolutions, which is, the hostages are civilian hostages being taken are a significant emotional problem right now.
Within Israel.
Within Israel. And it's why Netanyahu is continuing to get the support he is. And I think President Biden being more aggressive about whatever they do, focusing on those hostages, I think is the only way that this is going to shift.
Frank, I'm going to bring you in because this is a delicate sort of tightrope that the United States is currently walking and trying to balance. But just the discussion here on the panel, while there are discussions around, OK, well, is the shift big or small or subtle or not? The fact of the matter is 28,000 people are dead. And, when you look at the overall numbers, that's 100,000 that are either injured or missing or dead. That total number is horrifying the world.
Absolutely. It's appalling. And I think what you're seeing in the United States is the politics of this issue have shifted now. And I think the president and his team are just really getting their arms around that. There's a major block of Arab-American voters in Michigan who the president desperately needs for his re-election campaign. They are increasingly vocal. They are speaking as a bloc now, saying we will not support the president. So I think it's not coincidental that the day that Biden said the military actions by Israel are over the top was the day in which he had sent his senior team out to Michigan to meet with those folks. So I think the sands are shifting under Biden politically a little bit. And I think you're seeing that reflected in tougher action we're willing to take. Not enough as far as most people are concerned, but it's a step forward for the Biden guys anyway.
Frank Lowenstein, thank you so much for joining us. And of course, Hillary and Yasmin, we're going to keep you here for the rest of tonight's discussion. Stay with us because coming up, how to solve a problem like Vladimir Putin. I'll be talking about that with the panel next. The United States is set to impose fresh sanctions. What difference will it make?
Breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory order, and now they're going to be arrested.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Welcome back. Some breaking news to bring you now about Manchester United. The billionaire Sir Jim Ratcliffe has completed the purchase of 27.7% of Manchester United, taking control of football operations from the Glazer family. Sir Jim is looking to overhaul the club, which has gone 11th consecutive seasons without Premier League silverware. Manchester United is currently 6th in the league. Now, a question for you. One that's been a headache for world leaders for more than a decade. How do you solve a problem like Vladimir Putin? The answer from the White House today: more major sanctions to be announced on Friday. That's after a shopping list of indiscretions. First, the accusation that Russia was building a space nuclear weapon to target American satellites, today denied by Vladimir Putin. Then the suspicious death of a Russian helicopter pilot who defected to Ukraine. Maxim Kuzminov's body was found in a garage in Spain. And then the death of Vladimir Putin's most vocal critic, Alexei Navalny. His family have accused the Kremlin of playing a part in his death. Today, his mother called once again for the release of his body. Have a listen.
За моей спиной находится колония К3, полярный волк.
Behind me is the K3 colony Polar Wolf, where on February the 16th, my son Alexei Navalny died. I haven't been able to see him for 5 days. His body hasn't been handed to me. I'm not being told where he is. I'm addressing you, Vladimir Putin. The solution to the issue depends only on you. Let me finally see my son. I demand that Alexei's body is immediately returned to me so that I can bury him humanely.
Well, I've got my panel here with me. And Hillary, I mean, devastating here listening to Alexei Navalny's mother. And I guess it's the question we were talking about before, you know, America, its ability to use and enforce its power. But at the same time, does Putin really care?
Well, I just think this entire experience for so many people is really just that Vladimir Putin, the violent aggression that he will undertake to get his way is just beyond Western norms. It's nothing that we really even know how to deal with. And I think that view is sort of consistently shocking to people. And it's shocking to people in the United States. They haven't been able to effectively match the politics with what's actually happening. And I think people are you know, sort of starved for an answer. And more sanctions, we'll see. But, you know, almost every sanction that we'd had against Russia had been executed after the Ukraine war started. And as we've read multiple times, the oligarchs have gotten richer, right? The price of oil has, you know, increased. And so I'm not sure more sanctions can do it. Maybe only stopping him in Ukraine can do it.
But on that point, on Ukraine, I mean, you know, at every twist and turn, Vladimir Putin has sort of almost said, I'm just waiting for American willpower to break.
Yeah.
Because America stays with you until it decides it's not going to. And we've seen that time and time again with the United States, you know, that it will try everything else before it does what needs to be done. And so here we are yet again. And so I guess that's the calculus here for Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, I mean, you know, one has to, the question I asked when I saw the news of Zelensky is, you know, why did Putin need to do this now? Yes, there's an election coming through, but things are actually looking quite good for him. U.S. funding to Ukraine appears to be on shaky ground. There's a possibility of a Trump election coming down the track. You know, it's hard to know what more can be done in the sanctions. I mean, of course, there's a lot of talk even in this country about seizing Russian assets and using that to help finance the rebuilding of Ukraine. Clearly, there are things on the table, but I think what Putin has demonstrated in his imprisonment of Navalny and other critics and foes, and of course, many world leaders and of course, Navalny's family are laying the blame of Navalny's death squarely on Putin's doorstep, is that, you know, he's going to do what he's going to do and he has the means to do it. People say Navalny's, you know, alleged killing shows Putin's weakness, but it actually also shows his power, which I think is quite...
And then the weird thing that we saw today with Yulia Navalnaya's Twitter account, X account, cancelled. You have these characters, you know, in the West, Elon Musk, Tucker Carlson, who, you know, will go and I guess, you know, there are many who say, describe them, these kinds of characters throughout history as kind of useful idiots who serve the purpose of the authoritarian regime.
And, you know, I'm just going to say it. I think that Donald Trump enables them. very much so, enables this mentality that it's not just a America first view where it is a let's take care of our own home, let's not worry about funding the rest of the world or getting involved in other people's troubles, which Donald Trump was originally elected on, as people will recall, in 2016 when Hillary Clinton had been Secretary of State and really focused on diplomacy as and global leadership as a critical American value. Trump went the opposite way and actually won. And so I do think that that was a shift in the American people. But I think now we see this extension of that where he expresses an admiration for strongmen, an admiration for Putin, an admiration for Netanyahu, an admiration for Xi. And I think that's where you get the much more radical view of, an Elon Musk or Tucker Carlson who feel empowered to have this viewpoint, which heretofore I think really would have been on the radical right of American politics, completely disregarded, and now it's not.
And now it's come into the mainstream.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's been here for quite some time, unfortunately. And I think with regard to Yulia Navalnya's account, I mean, this kind of just also goes to show when you have big social media accounts who are run by the likes of Elon Musk. I believe Twitter's statement was that it was a mistake, some sort of accident. Her account was fairly new. However, the fact that Yulia Navalnya's account just happens to go down a few days after her husband's been killed, I mean, it's just a bit absurd. And I mean, the good news is that there was an uproar and it was restored. But I think it does draw some serious questions, even among the so-called, everyone should get a chance to speak crowd of, what are the kind of guardrails in place to ensure that these voices aren't just, silenced.
Well, we've got lots more to discuss in the next few minutes, so we will keep you both here with us. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up, the future of Julian Assange. The High Court is looking at whether the WikiLeaks founder should be sent to the United States after Australia said he'd be welcome back there. I'll discuss the case with his lawyer. Welcome back. For Julian Assange, it is the last roll of the dice. Today, lawyers representing the WikiLeaks founder began their final legal challenge against his extradition to the United States. He's wanted there on spying charges, but right now he remains in Belmarsh prison. Earlier, his wife Stella argued he would not survive if transferred to a jail in the United States. Have a listen.
Julian's life is at risk. Every day he's imprisoned, his life is at risk, but if he's taken to the United States, he will never be a free man again. He will not survive it. The United States wants to put him in the deepest, darkest hole of the US prison system for publishing the truth.
Stella Assange there today. Well, joining me now is the human rights lawyer, Jen Robinson, who represents Julian Assange. Jen, really good to see you. You are always and constantly speaking to Julian Assange. Just let us know how he's doing.
He's really not well. So today he didn't attend the proceedings, though there was provision made for him to attend in person or by video link. He's deteriorated significantly in the last 13 years through all of this, the last 5 years in a high security prison, and staring down the barrel of potential US extradition and what that will mean for him. We're at the sharp end of the case and it's having its toll on him for sure.
Are you hopeful?
Look, I think we have very strong grounds for appeal, whether it be on the free speech aspects of the case. This is, of course, criminalising public interest journalism and is the first time in history a publisher is being prosecuted in this way. The fair trial aspects. There's so much in this appeal and we should be granted permission to appeal, but of course it remains to be seen what the judges will do with it. But this is our last appeal in the UK. If we're refused permission, that's it. He could be extradited to the United States.
US lawyers, I'm just going to remind our audiences of what this case actually is. They say that the prosecutors, politicians, the intelligence community say the disclosure endangered the lives of agents working in the field. In 2019, the US Department of Justice described the leaks as one of the largest compromises of classified information in the history of the United States. Your argument is that this is about freedom of press and freedom of information.
Well, it's right to say this is one of the biggest leaks in US history, but it's also one of the biggest journalistic scoops in journalistic history. It changed the way that journalists are doing journalism. WikiLeaks has won journalism awards and Julian himself has won journalism awards the world over. He's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize every year since those publications because of the impact of those publications and the immense public interest, revelation about war crimes, the use of torture, arbitrary detention, evidence that's been used in courts around the world to hold governments accountable for human rights abuse. Indeed, even we had expert evidence in the case showing that the publications on the Iraq War brought about the end of the occupation of Iraq. So these are significant publications, and there's no evidence, even on the US's own case, in the evidence before this court, that anyone was harmed as a result of the WikiLeaks publication.
Because that's one of the things the US is pushing on, saying that the Iraqis, the Afghans who helped them in the field were named in these documents as part of the leaks and therefore endangered them.
There is not any evidence on the US's own case in their own affidavit evidence that anyone was physically harmed as a result of these publications. And what the US is doing is talking about the potential risk of harm, but not talking about the public interest. These publications have made a huge impact globally and are recognised around the world for having revealed important evidence of US state criminality, of corruption and human rights abuse the world over, been published in partnership with hundreds of media partners around the world. It's probably one of the most important publications and leaks in recent history. And that is what he's being prosecuted for. And that is what the US wants to send him to prison for the rest of his life.
Well, 175 years. I'm just going to go through, what they're saying. They're saying that what was leaked was approximately 90,000 Afghan war-related significant activity reports, 400,000 Iraq war-related significant activity reports, and 800 Guantanamo Bay detainee assessment briefs. They're saying this is all to do with impacting their national security.
This material was released in partnership with media organisations. So it wasn't that this information was just dumped online. It was, in many cases, and in most of the cases you're talking about, were redacted carefully to make sure that this material didn't harm anyone. And in fact, it was published alongside with media partners who put it in its proper journalistic and political context. These publications have had immense impact around the world. And as I've said, been used in courts to hold governments to account.
He has been in prison for the last few years. Before that, the Ecuadorian embassy here in the UK. There's now cross-party support in Australia to get him back home. That's something that you guys have really been working on. I mean, do you think that that is going to help with building the pressure?
Absolutely. This is unprecedented political support we're seeing at home in Australia. So for many years, we've been doing advocacy to the Australian government. I've been going down to the Australian Parliament to meet with MPs to brief them about the case for over a decade. And finally, we now have a Prime Minister, Prime Minister Albanese, who has said enough is enough, this must come to an end. We have bipartisan support and indeed a resolution passed the Australian Parliament with 2/3 support calling on the US and the UK to allow Julian to come home. This does have an impact. It sends a very strong message to the United States that this case ought to be dropped. It is an indictment that should never have been brought. It was issued by the Trump administration under a president that called the media the enemy of the people. Obama chose not to prosecute because of the risk to free speech protections. This is the first time in history a publisher is being pursued in this way with criminal prosecution. The New York Times, Washington Post is saying that it's criminalising public interest journalistic practices that they engage in. And so this is a case that ought to be dropped on the principled free speech position. But now you've got Australia, who has a special relationship with the US, making clear that they want this Australian citizen to be able to come home. It's becoming a test for the Australia-US alliance.
Very much so. Jen, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Next up, the art of gift diplomacy. North Korea's leader has received a new luxury armoured limo from Vladimir Putin, begging the question, what does Russia get in return?
This is Vesper. She's a live sentient canine. She's my canine partner. We come from Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service, and Vess and myself are also a member of International Search and Rescue, ISAR. She was bred by Westminster Police, and she is part of their breeding program, so she has all the attributes of a working dog. So she's got mental capacity, athleticism, genetics, everything we want, nice disposition.
Yeah.
But very early they identified that she wasn't awfully keen on biting.
Oh.
So, which might be a bit of a prerequisite for a police dog.
Yes.
So she was quickly moved into Division 4 detection. So she's very clever, very smart, she's methodical, she's systematic. And when that happened, our paths crossed. Yes, she was part of a keen team that went over to support Turkey after the earthquake and Morocco. So we're deployed under UK ISAR, funded by FCDO. And we get deployed to underdeveloping countries to offer UK aid in times of disaster. So she is a live sentient canine, and what her role is we work together with a team of other dogs, also in a very large team with UK ISAR. The dogs are really critical in their intel to what they give the incident commander. So she will go over collapsed structures, rubble, and she will indicate with a bark indication at orifices or any parts of the rubble where live scent is emanating. And then we can move on and, at a very fast approach, find and identify areas where live scent is emanating so the team can eventually effect a rescue.
Very dangerous job, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And the... I know, she looks like butter wouldn't melt here. Yes, it is, but it is risk assessed. And we are all professionals. We are firefighters from 14 different fire services across the UK, trained professionals, and the dogs are a team member just like everyone else who's valued on it. We are now off to the Kennel Club, where the official launch is of the finalists that will be proceeding to a UK vote to vote for the UK's nation favourite.
Yeah.
Vespa's category is Extraordinary Life for Working Dog.
Yeah.
Which I think had a little bit of a twist in it when she didn't like to bite. She likes people.
Yeah.
One of the little phrases that's been coined is she's a lover, not a fighter. And
how do people vote for her?
She gets on the Kennel Club website. It'll also be tagged on Merseyside Fire and Rescue. So look at all the worthy contenders, all the finalists that are there. Pick your favourite. It's a nice competition. The winners will be launched on Mother's Day in March, and we will be at Crufts. Looking forward to it.
They've become unlikely friends and apparent allies. It's emerged Vladimir Putin gave North Korea's Kim Jong-un a luxury limo. That's after Pyongyang supplied ballistic missiles and ammunition for Moscow's war against Ukraine. It got me thinking about the art of gift diplomacy.
Is it for wine or for water? For two cockerels. Thank you very much. Dziękuję.
Boris Johnson receiving a cockerel from the Ukrainian president, John Kerry giving 2 Idaho potatoes to Sergei Lavrov, and the leader of Turkmenistan gifting Vladimir Putin a puppy. Well, let's bring in our panellists this evening. I mean, sort of every time you do see world leaders, they do gift each other something. You know, I guess a puppy Vladimir Putin would have had to keep, but there are so many other gifts that I suppose never see the light of day.
Well, the goal really in foreign gifts is, in theory, it should be, let me give something that represents our country to demonstrate our, connection with you. But really, it's about flattery, right? They're looking for the best way to flatter somebody, and it gets you in trouble. Remember when Gordon Brown gave Barack Obama the beautiful carved sculpture, and then Barack Obama gave him a set of DVDs of American movies. And the British tabloids slaughtered Obama for doing it and thought it was the cheapest thing he could have possibly have done. So, flattery is probably a better choice than, local fare.
But, it's funny. It also, I think, tells us a lot about what world leaders think of the other, what they think their interests are, and things like that. I remember reading that the Sultan of Brunei had gifted George W. Bush a vocab building game, which, ouch, is... But, you also hear about some fun ones. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the late Queen Elizabeth gifted Biden a framed photo of herself, which is actually quite nice.
Yeah.
But, David Cameron gifted Barack Obama a table tennis table. So, there's also things that I think kind of hint to, as you were saying, the kind of friendship. There's a bit of playfulness there.
The Queen gave Donald Trump a Winston Churchill speech, I think, hoping that he would rise to the occasion. Right?
Yeah, I mean, on the point on the Queen gifting her own picture, I'm sure there's a lot of world leaders who received pictures of Donald Trump.
Well, that was actually his favorite gift, when, as he used to say, that all these world leaders were giving him portraits of himself. I think it was the Sultan of Brunei gave him a mother-of-pearl portrait of himself, and he was quite mad that the National Archives, because the rule in the United States is you may not keep a gift from a foreign leader unless you pay for it, and he thought that was completely unfair since they were all pictures of him.
And I guess in Kim Jong-un's case, he's keeping that limo.
I can't imagine he's giving it back.
No. Hilary Rosen, thank you so much for joining us, and Yasmin Serhan, thank you both for joining us here on tonight's panel. Now, that's all for tonight's programme. We've come full circle, from the diplomacy in New York to secure a ceasefire in Gaza, to the weapons being sold to Russia by North Korea. We're waiting to see what the US does next to prevent that offensive in Rafah. It's not clear yet whether members of the United Nations Security Council will vote this week. Thanks again for watching. We'll be back again tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Next up, the news at 10. Good night.